I'm here with you today to discuss and take a look at how superelevation diagrams can be created within your profile drawings. So here we've got an example of a superelevation diagram as well as a horizontal curvature diagram that are being shown along with our profile. We zoom out a little bit, we've got our profile up here, we do have our grid on it, and then we're enabling these other components down below, and that's what we're going to talk about. Now, before we get into looking at how this was set up, let's take a look at what we're displaying in this particular example. So it includes some titles over here for the different diagrams. It includes, in this case, with the superelevation diagram, I've got a light dashed line turned on at the 0 elevation. And then I've got superelevation lines displayed for the left and the right side of the roadway in orange and blue colors here. So the blue is on the left, the orange is on the right side. We've also got all of the key points along the superelevation delineated with another dashed line here, so they're easy to see where they're at. And then they're labeled at the bottom with an annotation, zoom in on that a little bit, indicating the slope at that particular location. The stationing, in this case, there's no plus in the formatting of it, but that could have been added in there. So as we look along here, we can see we've got no superelevation here. Both sides are at a negative 2%. Our left side starts increasing, and we gain up to a positive 8% at this location. On our right side of the road, the negative 2% continues to here, at which point it transitions up to a negative 8% on the right. And again, we can see our station number here formatted without a plus sign in this example. So that's the superelevation diagram, and we're going to discuss how to get all those components on there. Now, I've also displayed a horizontal curvature diagram in this situation where I'm showing a curvature, a straight line indicating there's no curvature there, or an arc and a line indicating that there is a curve there, and also display if there's a spiral that exists. Now this is helpful when comparing my superelevation because I can see the station and the location where my curve starts, where my PC is at, and where my superelevation is relative to that to check my distributions across that. So again, we'll take a brief look at that, but we're mainly going to focus on how the superelevation is set up. So now let's go back to our superelevation definitions. So we can go under our annotation group. And the one we're going to be looking at today is delivered with the product in the example workspaces. So if you want to take a look at this on your own and copy it and use it within your own environment, you're more than welcome to do that. It's kind of a great example to start with. So here we see that example, the superelevation frame. This portion is what's defining all of that super and the horizontal curvature in there. So we'll ignore that horizontal curvature bit for a minute and let's focus on the superelevation part. So this is done by setting up some frame annotation. So this is what this grid is about, and there's a variety of definitions in here. Before we go in and look at the exact definitions, let's talk about how you would set up your own new frame annotation if you wanted to. So I'll just set up a new one here. I will click Add. What do I want to add? I want to add a new frame annotation, and that would add a grid like this. Now this one being blank, I could then start adding components into it. I could add components like superelevation, or my curvature, which is where I did my curvature diagrams, or just individual components to do things like labeling. Now, if you look back up at our super diagram, you'll notice that it has a superelevation element. We can see that little graphic that exists there. And then these are kind of indented. And I have another superelevation graphic, and then I have a variety of labels in here, 4 different labels. What this means is that this is all placed on a single row. So remember, when we looked at our superelevation, it was drawing both the left and the right on top of each other and then positioning the labeling in that same area. The way we've done that, I'll go back over to my blank one, is I added in a superelevation. I've specified where that's going to be at, so along the left or the right side of the road. Now, if I went back right now and I added another superelevation, like I did here, and I said put this one along the right, what I would end up with is two separate superelevation diagrams. Notice how these are not indented one under the other. I'm going to delete that second one, and I'm going to go back, and instead of adding one, I'm going to insert a superelevation on top of the one that's already there. And I could specify that one to be along the right side. And notice how they're indented? Now that means this is one row that's going to be defined, and anything else that's defined under it will be contained on top of that same row. So when we see insert here, we have the same thing with a label. I could add a label, that would generate its own row, or I could insert a label, which would put it on top of this parent, whatever I've got selected. So back to the one that's already defined. So the first thing we've done is we've defined the actual superelevation diagram that we want to generate by adding one and then inserting the other. Now the definitions that go along there, first of all, I need to define where it's going to be at. And the options are simple. Is it along the left side or the right side of the road? So that one's along the left, that one's along the right. I've also specified a title. That was that title that we saw off in the left edge. Now, how is all that controlled? How did it know how to display the title, what color to display the super in? That's what's all controlled by the bottom portion of the dialog. So if we come down here and we look at, for this row, what is it doing? Well, it's displaying superelevation points along the left side of the road. That's what's being displayed. The title, here we see the title again. Here is the element template that is defining that title. So what is the level that the title is going to go on, etc. Here is the text style that's going to be used for it, and then the position of that. It's going to center it, both horizontally and vertically in my case, in that title area to the left side of that super row that we're creating. And I could offset it from that whatever point I've marked here. If I wanted to offset it just slightly from the bottom, I could put the bottom, give it a little offset value. The frame tab is going to define the overall height of that row. So all of my super information is going to fit in this 0.25 height row. And don't change that. And then if we scroll down, there's some additional definitions. Now, the first one that's very important is this max value. Am I going to allow it to draw that super diagram all the way to the outside edge of that 0.25 row, which could bump into some graphics next to it when we have two rows together. So I've told it to allow the row to be 0.25 high, but only allow the graphics to go up to 0.24. That's an important setting. Going down a little bit further, I have a choice. If I wanted to draw a border around this, I could, a frame around the whole thing. I chose not to. But what I did do was draw a median line. That was that horizontal line that ran down the median of it. And here is where I've defined an element template that specified that light gray dashed line style. And this element template is what specified for my left superelevation how it was going to be drawn. I believe that was the blue line we saw in there. If we look at the right side of the superelevation, the settings are virtually identical to the one above, other than I don't need to draw the median line again. It's already there, so I've got that turned off. I don't need to put on the title again, so I've got the title turned off. And my graph line itself, I've set to a different element template. So one was blue, one was orange. So pretty simple to create the superelevation part itself. Now the next thing we want to look at is labeling those points along the superelevation. I've defined 4 different definitions here to label those points. 2 of them are labeling stations, and 2 of those are labeling cross slopes on the left and the right side respectively. That's where the 4 come from. So I've just come in here and defined the label by choosing add or insert label, so that it was part of this super definition. And now the definitions that need to go into this. So first of all, what am I going to label? You'll see there's a variety of different things that you could label on your frame annotation. We're going to be labeling superelevation transitions and we're labeling specifically the cross slope along the left side. And if we looked at this one, it is labeling the super transition cross slopes along the right side. So let's look at the definitions for those two first, and then we'll come back and look at stationing. First of all, the location. Where do I want to actually label those cross slopes at? So I've got a choice of left or right. I want to match that to what I chose up here, so left to left. And what I'm going to label is either incremental. So if I wanted to create a label in every 10 feet or every 5 meters, label what the slope of the road is, I could do that by choosing increments and defining that increment value. If I wanted to label every point, I can do that too by choosing super points or by choosing super elevation transitions, which give me all the points but with a little bit more control. So I like to do it that way. So this allows me to control where I'm going to label the points, and I can choose that I want to label them only at the starts, only at the ends, or at the start and the end. Now this is useful if you want to label your starts and ends differently, or even if you wanted to label different types of super elevation transitions differently. So you could set up multiple definitions in here to label your constant changes, your constant transitions, different than your linears or your parabolics. In my case, I want to label everything the same, so I'm going to turn all of these on, label them at the start and the end at all those transitions. So all those points are going to get labeled. If we move over to the text definition now, I can tell it how that text is going to be labeled. It's going to be labeled horizontally. I could either go horizontal or vertical. Here's the element template, so it picks up the right levels, definitions of where to place that text. The text style that I'm going to use so that the text looks correct. The text favorite that I'm going to pick up so it knows what to label. So if we went and looked at our text favorites, they're in a separate file, but we can at least look at them in a read-only mode. So notice that we are pulling up the text favorite called Profile Tabular Data Super Slope Left. If I look at that definition, I've got a couple hard-coded pieces of text in here, E equals, and then I've got the computed piece in here, the placeholder for cross-section annotation slope. And you can see those definitions down here. It's a cross-section slope placeholder. Here's my formatting of that so that I'm getting it displayed the way I want. And then I've chosen to put the word left in parentheses at the end of mine, or right if it's on the right side, so it was easy to tell when they were labeled in the super diagram which labeling was on the left and which was on the right. And that's why I've created two different text favorites here. So this along the left is using the left text favorite. There's a variety of other options on how we control our text display if you need them. Probably the most important is your radial offset, which is really the vertical position of it within that super diagram. So this is the offset that I've got relative to the bottom of that range. So remember, our overall range was 0.25 high. I'm going to the bottom, I'm bumping back up a little bit, and I found that this super, or this slope, I'm labeling at an offset of 0.028. You'll just have to experiment with that a little bit to figure out what works best for your positioning. I can also choose to draw a frame around that text if I want. In my case, I'm only drawing a vertical line there. So if you remember, we had a light dashed vertical line at all of the points. That's done because I had this turned on, and then here's the element template that's specifying how that graphic looks and what level it's on. So that's how the two cross slopes were defined. The stationing, very similar, except stationing is not really unique to super elevation. So all I've done is say I want to label a point. Again, remember I have a whole bunch of different capabilities out here. I'm labeling a point, and I want to label the station of that point. That's where I'm at. And then I'd go back down to the bottom and define the actual location properties of what I want to label. This is where I've told it to label those super elevation points along the left side, or this one here is labeling super elevation points along the right side. Following through my tabs, filling out very similar information to what we saw before. I'm going to label it horizontally, my text template, my text styles, my text favorite that I'm using so I know what I'm actually labeling. So if we want to go look at that text favorite example for this one, profile tabular data station with decimals. So here is that definition and how it's displaying. So if we wanted to change that so that it included the plus in the definition or labeled it in some other manner, we could do that by adjusting our text favorite. Our vertical positioning and our offset of where we want to place that, if there is any offset. In this case, I'm putting the station all the way at the bottom, so I have no offset in it. So that is how we've set up that superelevation diagram. The horizontal curvature diagram, quite similar. I've gone in and I have added an alignment definition in here, which is what we see right here. That's that, and I've labeled it or given it a title of horizontal curvature. Notice that it is not indented under the super. It is starting a new row of its own. And then under that, I've also labeled a station and the radius along those elements. So it can be very similar to the super. First of all, we're going to define where it's going to be located. So the horizontal diagram that we put in there, what do we want to put on it? We're labeling a horizontal alignment and all of its components. We can choose what to label if we didn't want them all. What title we have on it, how that's defined, whether there's a box around it or any vertical lines on it, those types of parameters we could set up here. Our stationing, very, very similar to what we saw with our superelevation. In fact, this first part of the definition is the same. We're labeling points, and we're going to label them with a station value. The locations, slightly different. Now we're not labeling superelevation. We're going to label it along a horizontal alignment at all of its components, and we can choose those components, and we're choosing to label it at the start and the end of those. Titles, text, all of that layout, very, very similar to what we saw before. Just figure out what definitions you want on there and how you want to position those labels. The radius is just another label. Instead of labeling points like we were a minute ago or super transitions like we did previously, now we're annotating or labeling something along an alignment. In this case, we're labeling radius values along the active horizontal alignment or whatever alignment it is that we're being labeled. We can define the locations of those. In this example, I am only labeling radii, so I only want to do that on my arcs. I'm not labeling anything relative to spirals. I could add another definition in there. In fact, I may have one for the spirals in here. Yep, here's the definition for the two spirals because I'm picking up slightly different data. I'm going to have a different text favorite for those versus the text favorite that I'm labeling for the arcs. I want to take a look at those real quick. We've got a radius. What was my text favorite here? Arc radius length. So there is the one labeling for arcs. We're labeling the radius and the length. And for the spiral example, I am just labeling the length of the spiral. So that's how you set up an annotation group that will label superelevation diagrams below your profiles, or other things like a horizontal curvature diagram if you wanted to display those. I hope you found this useful. If you do find additional capabilities you'd like to look at along with these labelings, please do give us feedback so that we can continue to improve the products to serve your needs. Thank you.